March 30th, 1945, Heidelberg, Germany. In her small apartment on Romastrasse, 23-year-old Ingrid Becker paused mid-entry in her journal. She was fully aware that if the retreating Wehrmacht discovered her words, she could face immediate arrest. Yet the scene outside her window compelled her to write. Through the broken glass, she observed a reality that sharply contradicted 6 years of Nazi indoctrination. American soldiers, part of the 63rd Infantry Division, were distributing candy bars to local children. Not the poison treats warned about by Nazi authorities, but authentic Hershey bars. For the first time in months, the children laughed freely. The soldiers were well-groomed, wore clean uniforms, and smiled genuinely, offering a stark contrast to the tales of barbarism propagated by the regime. On that Good Friday, some 20,000 U.S. troops entered Heidelberg without firing a single shot. The city, home to a historic university and notable medieval architecture, had been declared an open city to spare it from destruction. Neither the civilians observing from behind curtains nor the American soldiers fully grasped the social consequences of this peaceful occupation. The human interactions that followed would catalyze a remarkable cultural transformation, eroding the rigid barriers between occupiers and the local population. These changes were measurable not in strategic plans, but in personal records. Within 18 months, nearly 14,000 German women would submit applications to marry American servicemen, reshaping individual lives and influencing broader cultural connections between the two nations. The rapid pace of the Third Reich's disintegration in the spring of 1945 meant that U.S. forces moved through German cities far quicker than military planners had anticipated. Frankfurt fell to General Patton's Third Army on March 29th. Heidelberg surrendered without resistance the following day. Key symbolic cities followed in quick succession. Nuremberg, the epicenter of Nazi ideology, was captured on April 20th, coinciding with Hitler's birthday, while Munich was taken on April 30th, the same day Hitler ended his life in Berlin. By July 4th, U.S. forces had reached their assigned sector in Berlin, marking a new phase of occupation. Among the early American officials in H.I. Heidelberg was Colonel William W. Johnson, tasked with managing the city as a central hub of military administration. His detailed diaries, preserved in military archives, would later provide invaluable insight into the interactions between American soldiers and German civilians during the initial weeks of occupation. Accounts from the ground reveal a mixture of bewilderment and astonishment. Private First Class James Morrison of Brooklyn, serving in the 3rd Infantry Division, wrote on April 2, 1945, "The local population regards us as beings from another world. Women, in particular, cannot believe we are not the monsters they were warned about. One elderly lady wept openly as I carried water for her, repeating, 'Dank, dank,' in a trembling voice." Similarly, Corporal Robert Hayes, stationed in Frankfurt, observed the civilians' reaction to the sheer abundance of American provisions. The soldiers' rations, often criticized among themselves, contained more meat and calories than many Germans had encountered in months. Children scrambled for discarded scraps, reflecting the extreme scarcity experienced by the local population. The material superiority of the U.S. military was staggering. The 12th Army Group alone comprised 1.3 million personnel, supported by 460,000 vehicles, consuming 1.25 million gallons of fuel daily. Individual divisions possessed more trucks than entire German Army Corps, and the dental corps treating U.S. soldiers outnumbered all practicing dentists in Bavaria. This industrial and logistical might underscored the contrast between occupiers and the occupied, creating conditions that would facilitate both awe and gradual social integration. In September 1944, President Franklin D. Roosevelt gave direct instructions to General Dwight D. Eisenhower regarding the post-war treatment of the German population. The underlying principle was clear. Germans, as a collective, had to fully grasp that their nation had participated in widespread, unlawful actions that violated the norms of modern civilization. This approach was eventually formalized under the non-fraternization policy, which became official through Joint Chiefs of Staff Directive 167, signed by President Harry S. Truman on May 10, 1945. The rules were strict and uncompromising. American soldiers were forbidden from interacting with German adults outside of strictly official matters. Any violation carried a heavy penalty, a $65 fine, which equaled a private's monthly wages, or more severe consequences, including court-martial and demotion. Military police were assigned to enforce the order rigorously, patrolling public spaces, streets, parks, and cafes to prevent any social contact between U.S. personnel and German civilians. The policy quickly proved to be impractical, as documented in the personal records of Technical Sergeant William Barnes of the 82nd Airborne Division. He described the situation as nearly impossible. Soldiers were living among the local population, yet could not interact with them. German women were working in mess halls, cleaning barracks and laundering uniforms. Barnes recounted being fined for the simple act of greeting a 60-year-old cleaning woman with a Guten Morgen, highlighting the absurdity of the restrictions. Remarkably, the first relaxation of the policy came within just a few weeks. On June 11, 1945, barely 5 weeks after Germany's surrender, Eisenhower amended the directive to allow American soldiers to converse with German children. Scenes of soldiers playing baseball with local youths, sharing candy, and engaging in simple games soon became widespread across the American occupation zones. By July 1945, restrictions were eased further, permitting interactions with adult Germans in public spaces, although entering private homes remained strictly prohibited. The ban on socializing was fully lifted on October 1, 1945, when the Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force officially removed all fraternization restrictions, maintaining only limits on marriage and billeting inside German residences. WAC Lieutenant Dorothy Patterson, stationed in Frankfurt, noted the symbolic significance of this shift, the resurgence of dances at service clubs. German women, often in their only formal attire, attended these events, and military police, initially tasked with enforcing the ban, eventually ceased intervention. By September, the number of German attendees regularly outnumbered the American nurses at these gatherings. Meanwhile, the winter of 1946 to 1947 would be remembered in Germany as the Hunger Winter, marked by extreme cold, with temperatures plunging to -25°C and critical shortages of coal. Even before these harsh conditions, many civilians faced near starvation, giving rise to a new, informal economy that relied heavily on the comparatively abundant resources provided by the American authorities. Official rations in the U.S.-controlled zones were set at 1,550 calories per day for a standard consumer. Yet most Germans did not qualify for this allocation. Individuals associated with the former Nazi Party were restricted to just 1,250 calories daily, underscoring the continued punitive measures alongside relief efforts. In post-war Germany, ordinary civilians struggled to survive on extraordinarily meager rations, often consuming only between 700 and 1,000 calories each day. By contrast, American soldiers stationed in Germany received approximately 4,000 calories daily, while German prisoners of war held in U.S. camps were allotted around 2,800 calories, almost triple what the average German citizen could manage. Diaries from those years offer a stark glimpse into this disparity. Maria Hoffman, a secretary from Munich who later settled in Chicago, documented the staggering cost of basic necessities in her notes. A single pound of butter could fetch 250 Reichsmarks on the black market, equivalent to her entire monthly income, while the same item was available to American soldiers for just 26 cents. Cigarettes were similarly inflated in value. A soldier could buy a carton for $1, but that same bundle could command 1,000 Reichsmarks on local streets. Hoffman lamented that Germans had effectively become impoverished in their own nation. Cigarettes quickly became the de facto currency. The allure of American tobacco was so strong that many German workers preferred to receive them as payment rather than conventional Reichsmarks. One cigarette might secure a loaf of bread, while an entire carton could purchase luxury items such as cameras, jewelry, or inherited family treasures. Organized crime networks, commonly referred to as Shiba, facilitated much of the trade, but ordinary citizens actively engaged in this cigarette economy as well. Ursula Mir, a 19-year-old typist employed at the American Command Center in Frankfurt, later recalled in 1985 that her nominal monthly wage of 120 Reichsmarks was supplemented with coffee, chocolate, and cigarettes. On the black market, just the coffee alone had a value of 500 Reichsmarks, and without these gifts, her family would have faced starvation. The imbalance in resources was visible across cities and towns. Mess halls serving American troops routinely discarded quantities of food that exceeded what many German households could consume in a week. Sergeant Anthony Romano of Philadelphia recounted witnessing the destruction of surplus provisions. "We were instructed to pour bleach on leftovers so Germans wouldn't touch them. It was horrifying. Children would watch us waste food while starving. Many of us ignored the orders when no officers were present." The demographic upheaval after the war created unprecedented challenges for German women. By 1945, nearly 5 million men aged 15 to 50 had perished, 11 million were detained in prisoner of war camps, and countless others were left disabled. In Berlin alone, women outnumbered men by roughly 2 to 1, resulting in what historians later termed the surplus women dilemma. Millions of women faced a future without marriage prospects in a society where single women had limited opportunities for financial independence. Elizabeth, a teacher from Wiesbaden, recounted in 1980 how women had to assume physically demanding labor to survive. They were labeled rubble women for clearing bombed buildings with their bare hands, earning just 72 Reichsmarks per month. This fate was shared by women of professional backgrounds, including teachers, secretaries, and shop assistants, who were forced into manual labor due to the scarcity of alternative employment. Jobs with the American military offered a rare reprieve from this grinding poverty. By December 1945, the U.S. forces employed around 300,000 Germans, among them approximately 100,000 women, who served as clerks, telephone operators, translators, secretaries, and domestic staff. These positions paid roughly 3 times the local wages and provided access to scarce American goods, presenting a lifeline in a country devastated by war. Anna Brown, who served as a translator at Campbell Barracks in Heidelberg, recounted her experience. "Officially, my pay from the Americans was 200 Reichsmarks. In reality, the most valuable compensation came from leftovers at the officers' mess. A single day's scraps could sustain my mother, grandmother, and 2 younger brothers for an entire week. Every piece of bread, every half-eaten apple was meticulously wrapped and carried home." Yet working for the Americans carried a heavy social stigma. German women employed by U.S. personnel were often disparaged as ambient army lovers, while more insulting terms such as Schokoladenmädchen or chocolate girls suggested that they traded affection for sweets. Another derogatory label, Veronica Dunkers, emerged as a cynical play on venereal disease, implying that women who accepted American gifts were morally compromised. Gertrude Wagner, who worked in an American motor pool, described the impossible choices women faced. "Taking jobs from the Americans marked us as traitors. Dating them drew suspicion and contempt. But staying home and going hungry wasn't a solution either. We were trapped, with no path that didn't bring shame or danger." The wartime scarcity had turned everyday items into a new kind of currency, creating an unprecedented social hierarchy in post-war Germany. American troops possessed resources that were virtually unimaginable to Germans. Chocolate bars, instant coffee, canned goods, cigarettes, nylon stockings, soap, all long absent from German households. Master Sergeant Dale Peterson, stationed from Iowa, meticulously tracked the informal trading system that emerged. He noted, for instance, that one pair of nylon stockings could be exchanged for 10 kilograms of potatoes or 5 marks worth of meat. A pound of coffee could buy a man's suit. A carton of cigarettes might be traded for a radio or camera. In some cases, German families parted with family heirlooms passed down for generations in exchange for basic food. Desperation was vividly illustrated by the coal trains. Women risked their lives by climbing onto slow-moving trains to collect coal for their families. When military police began guarding the shipments, some women offered bribes or other incentives to turn a blind eye. The moral ambiguity of survival was a recurring theme. Hannah Laura Schmidt, interviewed decades later in 1995, recalled, "My friend Greta was dating an American sergeant. He gave her chocolates, coffee, and stockings, which she shared with 5 families in our neighborhood. Was she a prostitute or simply trying to save lives? Hunger left us unable to judge." Post-exchanges or PX stores became potent symbols of American abundance. Off-limits to most Germans, these shops displayed goods that had vanished from German life during the war. Fresh fruit, meat, white bread, candy, clothing, radios, and watches. German staff who worked inside the stores described them as something akin to paradise. Brunhild Dow recalled the anguish of looking through PX windows. American wives would purchase dozens of chocolate bars while German children begged for bread outside. The Americans weren't unkind. It was just their ordinary life. But their ordinary was our unattainable dream. By the autumn of 1945, interactions between German women and American servicemen had grown widespread and difficult to regulate. Service clubs and dance halls, theoretically reserved for U.S. personnel, became increasingly populated by German women. Venues such as the Feminina Palace in Frankfurt, Haus Vaterland in Berlin, and America House emerged as centers of this new social order. Dance events followed a recognizable pattern. German women arrived in their best remaining clothing, often modified Wehrmacht uniforms dyed dark to resemble civilian attire, the only material available. They had taught themselves American dance steps using hidden radios and smuggled magazines. Bands, frequently composed of German musicians who had secretly preserved jazz recordings through the Nazi era, performed works by Glenn Miller, Benny Goodman, and Tommy Dorsey. Corporal Eugene Davis from Detroit wrote home in December 1945, "The girls are desperate to dance. They've been forbidden American music for 12 years, yet they know every song, every word. It's heartbreaking and remarkable at the same time." These dance halls offered more than entertainment. They were arenas of both romance and survival. Military police reports documented the exchange economy within these spaces. German women often gained entry through sponsorship by American soldiers. A single dance might earn a chocolate bar. Even one evening spent in company could bring coffee or cigarettes, and ongoing relationships could ensure a family's survival. Ilse, who met her future American husband at a Frankfurt dance in 1946, later described the atmosphere as charged with tension, desire, and necessity, a vivid microcosm of the new social dynamics shaping occupied Germany. Although public appearances suggested music and dancing were the focus, the underlying reality was well understood by everyone. Young women without dependents danced simply for pleasure, while those with starving family members often performed to secure basic sustenance. American personnel were aware of this dynamic, yet little could be done. It reflected the harsh circumstances of post-war life. The prohibition on marriages between American servicemen and German citizens generated both administrative chaos and deep personal suffering. Despite these restrictions, numerous couples fell in love, prompting complex methods to bypass military regulations. Some soldiers forged or obtained falsified paperwork, asserting that their partners were displaced persons from non-German territories. Others coordinated marriages through legal representatives in the United States, while many simply cohabited illegally, risking disciplinary action. Over time, pressure for policy reform emerged from unexpected quarters. Military chaplains, initially resistant to German-American unions, became vocal advocates after counseling numerous couples who demonstrated genuine commitment. Major Thomas Anderson, a military chaplain, documented in an official report, "These relationships are not trophies of war or conquests. I have officiated marriages for these men before they went into battle and mourned them after their deaths. They have earned the right to choose their spouses freely." On December 11, 1946, the ban on such marriages was finally lifted, albeit under strict conditions.
German women wishing to marry Americans underwent rigorous scrutiny. Authorities conducted political background investigations to detect any Nazi affiliations, medical evaluations, and character references, while also requiring proof that the marriage was motivated by affection rather than financial need. The approval process typically lasted a minimum of 3 months, and in many cases extended far longer. Within just 1 day of the policy change, military offices received 2,500 new applications. By January 1947, that number had grown to 7,000, each accompanied by 15 separate forms, 3 health examinations, and multiple intelligence interviews. Margaretta Thompson, who married Sergeant James Thompson in 1947, recalled the invasive nature of these procedures. "They questioned me about my own and my parents' political affiliations, my past relationships, my intentions in marrying, and even whether I was expecting a child. My entire life was scrutinized as though I were under criminal investigation." Jimmy was angry, but I assured him the struggle was worth it for us to be together. Initially, the War Brides Act, passed on December 28, 1945, entirely excluded German nationals alongside Japanese citizens. Only after 2 amendments in 1946 and 1947 were German women allowed to legally immigrate. Even after the legal framework was amended, the journey remained arduous and emotionally taxing. The first contingent of German war brides, 317 women and 147 children, departed Bremenhaven aboard the USA Henry Gibbons on February 3, 1947. On average, these women had waited 8 months post-marriage for permission to immigrate. For many, this voyage marked their first time leaving their native regions as they crossed the Atlantic to a nation where anti-German sentiment remained widespread. Ruth Patterson Niemeyer documented her voyage in a diary, revealing the mixture of fear and anticipation. On February 3rd, she wrote, "I feel both seasick and terrified. The Red Cross volunteers are kind, yet fellow passengers avoid us once they hear our accents. One woman even spat at me upon learning I was German." By February 10th, she saw the Statue of Liberty and recorded crying for an hour, unsure whether it was from joy, relief, or apprehension. The ships used were often converted military transports, basic yet maintained to acceptable standards. Cabins intended for 4 passengers frequently housed 6 to 8. Children were placed in separate nurseries, and pregnant women were required to travel before the 7th month of pregnancy or delay their journey until after childbirth, in compliance with military regulations.
The journey across the Atlantic spanned nearly 2 weeks, filled with uncertainty and apprehension, recalled Hannah Laura Williams and Annis Schmidt. During the voyage, the women exchanged basic English phrases with one another, expressions of gratitude, greetings, and promises of good conduct. Every step toward America brought anxiety as they feared committing social errors in an unfamiliar culture. Arrival in the United States introduced a new set of difficulties. Many war brides soon realized that their husbands had presented misleading versions of their lives. Claims of wealth could be vastly exaggerated. A successful businessman might in reality work at a gas station, and a large farm in Iowa could turn out to be a single rented room above a garage. Some husbands were already married or had relatives who refused to accept a German daughter-in-law. Official immigration records provide only a partial picture. Between 1946 and 1950, around 14,000 German women entered the U.S. as war brides. These numbers, however, do not reflect the personal struggles and cultural adjustments each woman faced. In states with established German-American communities, such as Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Ohio, war brides often experienced a smoother integration. In contrast, those settling in smaller towns with lingering anti-German sentiment encountered hostility, social exclusion, and even threats. Martha Davis, who arrived in Alabama with Nay Becker in 1947, recalled the extreme social resistance. Her husband's family avoided her for 6 months, neighbors labeled her a Nazi during daily errands, and local shopkeepers refused service until others intervened. Though John, her husband, offered support, his long work hours left her isolated and distressed, resulting in daily tears for an entire year. Despite these challenges, many German women eventually gained acceptance through their skills in language, music, crafts, and other contributions. They established support networks, often meeting in churches or community centers, to maintain traditions and exchange advice. German war brides also became involved in local civic life, participating in school associations, church groups, and broader community organizations. As Ingrid Johnson recalled, societal expectations demanded perfection. Flawless wives, mothers, and citizens. Every misstep was perceived not merely as an individual failure, but as a reflection on all German women. A turning point came on June 20, 1948, with the currency reform that replaced the nearly worthless Reichsmark with the Deutsche Mark. Every citizen received 40 new marks, equivalent to roughly $10. The reform had profound psychological effects. Store shelves that were empty on Friday were stocked by Monday, providing Germans with real purchasing power. No longer reliant on barter or desperate measures, they could earn a living and make purchases with dignity. The black market rapidly diminished, cigarettes ceased to function as currency, and American soldiers could no longer maintain extravagant lifestyles on military pay alone. Relationships that had been motivated by necessity could now form based on genuine affection. Captain William Stewart, commander of military police in Frankfurt, noted the swift shift. German women who had previously accepted any attention from American men became more selective. Courtship became required. Flowers, dinners, and authentic interest were necessary, resembling dating customs in their homeland. Economic recovery followed rapidly, with industrial output rising by 50% within 6 months and unemployment dropping from 20% to 5%. German women returned to regular employment, including teaching, nursing, and office work, while construction work transitioned from improvised rubble women crews to professional teams. These changes fundamentally altered the dynamics of German-American relationships. Anna Coleman described the transformation in personal terms. Prior to the reform, relationships were characterized by dependency, but afterward, equality became possible. This shift allowed marriages to evolve into genuine partnerships. Heidelberg emerged as an unofficial hub of German-American social life, largely because the city had escaped bombing damage and hosted the largest concentration of American forces in Europe. By 1950, approximately 20,000 U.S. soldiers and 5,000 family members lived there, turning the medieval university town into a unique space of bicultural exchange. On August 23, 1948, the former Wehrmacht installation known as the Großdeutschland Kaserne was officially renamed Campbell Barracks and gradually transformed into a self-sufficient American enclave within Germany. The adjacent residential area, later called Mark Twain Village, began construction that same year to accommodate American families in suburban-style homes. By 1951, a central shopping district opened its doors, offering a full-scale American supermarket, a beauty parlor, and a soda fountain. Though officially off-limits to German residents, these attractions drew local curiosity, illustrating the growing cultural presence of the American community. Education played a distinctive role in this environment. German universities became sites of cross-cultural exchange, with American officers attending courses in German literature and philosophy, while German students provided English instruction to the soldiers' wives. Wilhelm Hoffmann, a professor active from 1947 to 1965, noted that his classroom evolved into a neutral territory where former adversaries could engage in discussions about Goethe and Shakespeare on equal footing. The town of Heidelberg fostered romantic connections as well. Its riverside promenade along the Neckar, castle gardens, and student taverns offered idyllic spaces for social interaction, experiences largely impossible in cities heavily damaged by the war such as Frankfurt and Mannheim. Military observers estimated that nearly one-third of U.S. servicemen stationed in Heidelberg for over 6 months formed serious relationships with local women. Residents like Lisa Morgan and Nate Simon, who met her husband in 1949, recalled Heidelberg as a surreal oasis. The historic castle, the old stone bridge, and lively student songs created an almost storybook setting that allowed Americans to momentarily forget the war. Meanwhile, Frankfurt emerged as the principal economic hub of the American occupation. The IG Farben building, once the headquarters of the chemical conglomerate responsible for Cyclone B, was repurposed in March 1945 to house American military command and oversee programs such as the Marshall Plan and denazification initiatives. The American presence reshaped the city's character, effectively transforming parts of Frankfurt into a miniature Manhattan. By 1949, roughly 15,000 Americans lived in requisitioned buildings, forming distinct neighborhoods with modern comforts that far exceeded what most Germans could access for years. The Plattenhaus housing development alone contained 777 apartments designed exclusively for American families, offering central heating, contemporary kitchens, and playgrounds.
The Frankfurt PX, the largest American military retail store outside the United States, became a notable site of interaction between Americans and Germans. Employing around 500 local residents, it provided one of the first spaces in post-war Germany where people from both nations worked as peers rather than occupiers and the occupied. Margaret Anderson, née Schultz, who met her husband while working there in 1950, described the store as neutral ground where friendships and even romantic connections could develop. The city's nightlife also flourished in post-war conditions. Jazz clubs, often housed in bombed-out basements, became hubs for cultural exchange. The Hot Club Frankfurt, established in 1947, gained renown for its Saturday night jam sessions, where German musicians and American soldiers blended styles to create a new musical fusion. Demographic consequences of the occupation were significant. Estimates suggest that approximately 94,000 children were born to German mothers and Allied fathers, with around 37,000 of these having American fathers. These occupation children faced unique social challenges in a nation struggling with its own post-war identity. White American fathers generally integrated more smoothly, particularly when parents married. But those born to African American fathers, about 5,000, encountered entrenched racial prejudice in a country with minimal black population and lingering Nazi-era racial ideologies. Hans Johnson, born in 1947 to a German mother and African American father, recalled a childhood marked by isolation and discrimination. He was repeatedly insulted with racial slurs, segregated in schools, and shunned by local children, while his mother often lost employment upon revealing his heritage. Some families, seeking better opportunities for their children, placed mixed-race infants in orphanages with hopes of adoption abroad. The Brown Baby Plan, spearheaded by African-American journalist Mabel Grammer, successfully relocated approximately 500 of these children to families in the United States between 1951 and 1953. Dorothy Brown, adopted in 1952, recalled that her biological mother had left her in Germany when she was just 3 years old. The mother later sent her a letter on her 18th birthday, expressing love but explaining that she could not provide a future for Dorothy in post-war Germany. In hindsight, Dorothy recognized the truth of that statement. Her adoptive family in Chicago offered opportunities that would have been unimaginable in Germany during the 1950s. In the immediate aftermath of World War II, the United States launched the America House program beginning in 1945 as part of its efforts to democratize Germany. These cultural centers were established in key cities and were intended to expose Germans to American ideals and lifestyles. By 1950, 5 principal centers operated in Berlin, Frankfurt, Munich, Hamburg, and Stuttgart, supplemented by smaller reading rooms in numerous other locations. They represented some of the first glimpses Germans had of American society beyond the presence of occupying forces. The libraries at these centers stocked works that had been banned under the Nazi regime, including books by Hemingway, Steinbeck, and Jewish authors. Movie screenings introduced audiences to Hollywood films and documentaries that highlighted the principles of American democracy. English classes, frequently led by military spouses, attracted large numbers of students eager to learn the language and engage with American culture. Among these centers, Munich's America House, which opened in 1946, became particularly prominent, drawing as many as 80,000 visitors each month by 1950. Robert McNamara, who directed the center, not to be confused with the future Secretary of Defense, described the phenomenon as Germans eager to embrace American culture, attending lectures on democracy, participating in discussions on federalism, and exploring American history. It was soft power operating at its most effective.
The German Youth Activities (GYA) program was designed to engage young people aged 14 to 25. GYA centers provided structured activities such as sports, music, crafts, and especially dances, which became their most popular offerings. These events allowed young Germans to socialize with Americans in a supervised environment, thereby reducing the uncontrolled fraternization that had been common immediately after the war. Bridget Cooper Navagna, who met her future husband at a GYA dance in 1951, later recalled that these dances were often the only occasions their parents would allow for contact with American peers. With chaperones in place, events ending at 10 p.m., and only soft drinks served, German youth nevertheless learned American dance styles like jitterbug and swing and felt a growing connection to the broader world. As the American occupation transitioned from punitive measures to a strategy focused on alliance building, policies shifted to accommodate families stationed in Germany. By 1950, about 30,000 dependents of American military personnel were living in the country. These families, and particularly the wives, served as informal cultural ambassadors, gradually breaking down barriers through everyday interactions. Military wives employed local domestic helpers, shopped in German stores when permitted, and enrolled their children in local schools when base facilities were full. These ordinary exchanges humanized the occupation on both sides. Dorothy Mitchell, who lived in Frankfurt as a military spouse between 1949 and 1952, reflected that her German maid, Frau Kleine, taught her more about life in Germany than any official briefing. Frau Kleine instructed her in cooking traditional German dishes, shared insights about local customs, and became a friend. Hearing the maid recount the loss of her son in Russia helped Dorothy understand that these were grieving mothers, not abstract enemies. In 1950, the military also established German-American women's clubs, which brought together American spouses and German women to foster cultural understanding. These clubs organized charitable activities, language exchanges, and social gatherings, building enduring friendships. Colonel James Patterson, the community relations officer, observed that such informal interactions dismantled social barriers more quickly than formal programs could. When mothers from both sides discussed everyday issues, children's health, schooling, and family matters, political differences faded into the background. As the American occupation moved further from conquest toward partnership, romantic relationships between American soldiers and German women evolved as well. Between 1945 and 1948, many unions had been born out of necessity, with women seeking food or basic survival support. Following the currency reform, however, a new pattern emerged. Soldiers stationed in Germany for 2-year tours had the opportunity to build genuine, lasting relationships. German women, no longer driven solely by need, could form attachments based on attraction and compatibility rather than mere survival. Records from military chaplains reflect this shift. Marriages between American men and German women rose from 2,500 in 1947 to 5,000 in 1950, while the divorce rate among these couples dropped from 30% to 15%, aligning closely with rates in the United States. Sergeant Michael O'Brien, who wed his German bride in 1951, described the change. In 1946, many soldiers married women they barely knew, motivated by pity or a desire to help. By 1951, couples typically dated for months, met each other's families, and learned each other's language. These relationships were built on genuine connection, reflecting a profound social transformation in post-war Germany.
The outbreak of the Korean War in June 1950 created a sense of immediacy in personal relationships across the United States. Many soldiers, confronted with the possibility of imminent deployment, chose to marry rapidly, which led to a noticeable rise in wartime weddings. Surprisingly, these hastily arranged unions often proved resilient. Military records indicate that around 70% of these marriages endured for more than 2 decades. Following West Germany's restoration of sovereignty and entry into NATO in 1955, roughly 20,000 German women moved to the United States as military brides. Their experiences adjusting to life in America varied considerably depending on where they settled, their level of education, and the reception of the local community. In cities with established German-American populations, newcomers often found networks that eased their transition. For instance, neighborhoods in Milwaukee, Cincinnati's Over-the-Rhine district, and St. Louis's German associations provided familiar cultural touchstones, including food, language, and social customs. These war brides frequently served as cultural liaisons, linking contemporary German practices with the older German-American communities. Emma Roberts-Ney Fisher, who relocated to Milwaukee in 1949, exemplified this integration, eventually rising to become president of the German-American Ladies Society by 1960. Initially, the older generations of German Americans were wary of these newcomers, seeing them as reminders of recent wartime adversaries. However, the war brides introduced a modern German culture, distinct from the traditions preserved by their grandparents, and gradually revitalized these communities. In contrast, women settling in rural parts of the United States faced far greater challenges. Often isolated as the only Germans within a wide radius, they frequently encountered suspicion and social barriers. Some maintained their cultural practices privately while adopting the outward appearance of fully American lives. Katharina Brown Nemeth, who moved to rural Arkansas, described this dual existence. At home, she preserved German culinary habits, language, and holiday customs, while in public, she actively participated in local institutions such as the PTA and church activities, presenting herself as entirely assimilated. Beyond social integration, German war brides contributed significantly to educational and cultural life in America. Many arrived with educational backgrounds exceeding the norm for American women at the time.
Graduates of German gymnasiums had studied multiple languages, classical music, literature, and philosophy. School districts soon recognized their potential, particularly in teaching languages and music. By the 1960s, hundreds of German war brides were employed as educators, introducing innovative approaches to language instruction and classical education. Dr. Margareta Williams née Hoffman, who became a high school German teacher in Ohio, exemplified this impact. While traditional American methods focused primarily on grammar and translation, she implemented conversational teaching, cultural immersion, and student exchange programs. Her approach enabled students not only to acquire language skills, but also to gain a deeper understanding of German culture. The influence of German war brides extended into domestic life as well. They brought distinctive holiday customs, such as Advent calendars, Christmas markets, and traditional baking, many of which gradually became integrated into mainstream American celebrations. Additionally, they introduced European culinary techniques, household management strategies, and child-rearing practices that subtly reshaped suburban American norms, leaving a lasting imprint on the everyday culture of their communities. The impact of German war brides on post-war American society only became apparent decades later, as observed by figures like Ingrid Thomas and Née Bao. Across communities, American families gradually adopted practices previously foreign to them, brewing freshly ground coffee rather than relying on instant mixes, baking bread at home from raw ingredients, and cultivating personal gardens. The skills these women brought from Europe subtly reshaped the daily habits of a nation accustomed to convenience. The psychological experiences of German women who married American soldiers reveal profound adaptability and resilience. Their lives had been shaped by relentless challenges, enduring the destruction and trauma of German wartime Germany, surviving occupations and economic hardship, leaving behind family and homeland, adjusting to a completely different cultural environment, and confronting prejudice in their new society. Research from the 1950s confirms that while these women frequently experienced depression and anxiety, they also demonstrated extraordinary psychological adjustment. In a 1955 study led by Dr. William Henderson, which surveyed 500 German war brides, 60% reported complete satisfaction with life in the United States after 5 years, a notable increase from the 40% who felt similarly after only 1 year. Henderson highlighted the immense personal transformation required. These women had to reconstruct their identities, shedding aspects of their German nationality while retaining cultural knowledge and habits, a delicate and psychologically demanding balancing act. Many war brides chose silence about their past, rarely sharing experiences with even their own children. This reticence often stemmed from shame over Germany's role in the war, concern about American prejudice, and a desire to shield the next generation from painful memories. Barbara Miller, whose mother was a German war bride, uncovered the hidden history of her family only after her mother passed away in 1995. Among her discoveries were letters in German, photographs of cities damaged by bombing, and a diary chronicling hunger and fear. Her mother had never spoken German at home, mentioned her family, or explained the sorrow evoked by hearing German music. In essence, she reconstructed her identity entirely to assimilate into American life. Beyond personal adaptation, German war brides became informal cultural emissaries during the Cold War. By offering Americans a humanized perspective of Germany, these women countered prevailing stereotypes at a time of escalating tensions with the Soviet Union. Their children, often referred to as the second generation, often served as cultural intermediaries. Many pursued studies in German language and history, became translators, or entered international business and diplomacy. Military records indicate that the offspring of these women enlisted at higher-than-average rates and often requested assignments involving Germany. Lieutenant Colonel James Mueller, whose mother was a German war bride, noted that his mother's recollections and insights into German society prepared him for service abroad far better than any formal military briefing.
The contributions of war bride children extended well beyond the armed forces. Their upbringing instilled linguistic proficiency, cultural awareness, and a global perspective, positioning them for careers in diplomacy,
international commerce and cross-cultural communication. In this way, the legacy of German war brides became deeply interwoven with American social and professional life, influencing not only domestic practices but also shaping transnational connections during a pivotal era in world history. In the decades following World War II, major multinational companies increasingly sought out individuals who could navigate both American and German contexts with ease. Their bicultural upbringing proved invaluable in bridging these worlds. "We were inherently global citizens," recalled Professor Maria Anderson, whose mother had immigrated in 1948. "From childhood, we were interpreters between cultures, translating American habits to our German relatives and German customs to our American friends. This naturally prepared us for careers that spanned continents, long before globalization became a familiar term." The 1980s marked an extraordinary wave of returns to Germany by so-called war brides, women who had married American servicemen and left their homeland decades earlier. Advances in air travel, the easing of international tensions, and the increasing leisure time of retirement made journeys feasible that would have been unthinkable in earlier years. These homecomings were complex, often mixing joy with sorrow. Many returning brides confronted families and communities changed beyond recognition. Some discovered relatives separated by the Iron Curtain, hometowns radically rebuilt, and loved ones who either resented or idealized the years spent in America. Reunions could be tender and reconciliatory, but sometimes they reopened old wounds. Hannelore Davis Naismith's visit to Hamburg in 1985, after 38 years away, exemplifies this tension. Quote, "My sister had spread the story that I abandoned our family for the comforts of America. In truth, I sent money for 2 decades. My husband worked in a factory and we faced real struggles. None of that matched the narrative my family had constructed." Despite the emotional difficulty, Schmidt described the visit as necessary for closure. To ease the emotional burden, many war brides organized collective trips. These group journeys, often coordinated by associations such as the German War Brides Association of America, allowed women to face the homeland together, providing mutual support when confronting unsettling changes. The largest of these, held in 1987, brought 300 women to Germany for a 2-week exploration. Quote, "Returning in a group gave us courage," explained organizer Christina Thomas. "We shared the shock of unfamiliar landscapes, grieved past losses, and celebrated the joy of reconnection." While solitary visits could be traumatic, these organized reunions offered a form of communal healing, illustrating a subtle but profound social transformation.
Statistics underscore the scale of this post-war phenomenon. Between 1946 and 1955, roughly 14,000 to 20,000 German women married American soldiers, with 1946 alone accounting for about 2,500 unions. Remarkably, 70% of these marriages endured for more than 2 decades, compared to a 50% longevity rate among American marriages at the time. Within 5 years, 15% of these unions ended in divorce, and then the additional 15% were cut short by military deaths during the Korean War or subsequent service. Immigration patterns reveal further insights. The first ship carrying war brides sailed on February 3, 1947, transporting 317 women. Immigration peaked in 1949 with approximately 3,500 arrivals. On average, brides relocated 8 months after marriage. Most settled in urban centers, 60%, while the remaining 40% chose smaller towns or rural regions. Distribution across U.S. states varied. New York hosted 2,500 war brides, California 2,000, Texas 1,800, Pennsylvania 1,500, Illinois 1,200, Wisconsin 1,000, Ohio 900, and 5,100 were spread across other states. The next generation reflected this cultural blending. About 37,000 children were born to these unions, including 5,000 of mixed racial heritage with African American fathers, and around 500 of these children were later adopted by American families. 80% of legitimate children immigrated with their mothers, while 20% remained in Germany with relatives. Employment patterns further illustrate integration. In 1946, roughly 300,000 Germans worked for U.S. military installations, including 100,000 women in administrative capacities. Wages were initially higher for Americans, about 200 Reichsmarks plus benefits, compared to the average German wage of 120 Reichsmarks. Following currency reform, pay discrepancies were largely equalized within 2 years. The personal and professional relationships forged between German women and American servicemen during this period left enduring marks on both societies. These marriages, arising from exceptional historical circumstances, challenged pre-existing cultural prejudices, fostered mutual understanding, and ultimately served as human bridges linking former adversaries. In the immediate aftermath of World War II, Germany was a landscape defined by survival under extreme conditions, where basic necessities were scarce and social interactions were heavily constrained. Initial contact between German civilians and American soldiers was shaped by necessity and caution, with fraternization often banned and considered socially taboo. Yet, as the post-war years progressed, the harsh realities of occupation gradually gave way to genuine cultural interactions, fostered by economic reconstruction and the stabilization of political structures. During this period, an estimated 14,000 to 20,000 German women married American servicemen. Their experiences were marked by a mixture of bureaucratic hurdles, societal scrutiny, and personal adaptation. Despite these challenges, the majority of these women successfully integrated into life in the United States, establishing new families and navigating the complexities of a foreign culture. Their children, representing the second generation of these unions, frequently served as informal intermediaries between Germany and America. Many grew into careers that capitalized on their bicultural upbringing, facilitating cross-cultural understanding during the Cold War and in an increasingly interconnected global economy. Reflecting on her own experiences at a 1995 reunion for war brides, Anna Patterson Mueller described her generation as unplanned participants in history who became conduits for reconciliation. She noted that unions formed in the chaos of war had unexpectedly contributed to building peaceful relations between nations, with the next generation of children serving as bridges between former adversaries. These personal histories illustrate how human connections can transcend national hostilities. By 1955, as the Allied occupation formally concluded and West Germany entered NATO, relations between Germans and Americans had undergone a profound transformation. Early post-war interactions, driven by hunger, isolation, and survival, gradually evolved into partnerships grounded in mutual respect. Women who had once labored for meager wages clearing bombed-out streets were now employed in American facilities as recognized and valued workers. Those who had bartered personal dignity for small comforts could now purchase goods with a stable currency in a recovering economy. Likewise, social ostracism once directed at women involved with Americans diminished as diplomatic relations and cultural understanding strengthened. Wolfgang Petersen, son of a German war bride, chronicled this shift in his 2000 documentary, Bridges of Love, capturing the transition from suspicion to friendship at both personal and national levels. The experiences of these women reveal fundamental truths about human behavior under extreme conditions. Survival pressures often dissolve social barriers, creating spaces for interaction that might otherwise be forbidden. Once basic needs are met, individuals are able to engage authentically, allowing reconciliation to emerge. The occupation years thus provide a unique lens through which to examine both the fragility and resilience of human connection. The scale of the German-American encounter during the occupation can be illustrated by several key figures. At its peak in May 1945, the U.S. military presence in Germany reached 1.6 million personnel before stabilizing at approximately 200,000 from 1946 to 1950. By 1950, only 30,000 Americans remained dependent on military installations, while German nationals employed by U.S. forces numbered around 300,000. Over the decade of occupation, roughly 3 million Americans cycled through Germany, highlighting the sheer scale of the interaction. Economic disparities were stark.
German civilians subsisted on daily rations of 1,000 to 1,550 calories, whereas American soldiers received roughly 4,000 calories per day. The average German wage hovered around 120 Reichsmarks, while a black market carton of cigarettes could cost 1,000 Reichsmarks, compared to just $1 or 10 Reichsmarks at the official rate in PX stores. Social spaces began to flourish. Dance halls in the American zone charged $4.50 for entry by 1947. America House in Munich attracted 80,000 visitors monthly by 1950, and youth participation in organized activities reached 250,000 annually. By 1952, 85 German-American women's clubs were active, and cultural exchange programs had engaged around 500,000 participants from 1945 to 1955.
The human dimension of this transformation is equally measurable in personal outcomes. Marriage applications numbered 2,500 on the first day of legal approval, ultimately resulting in 14,000 to 20,000 marriages over the occupation period. Confirmed war brides who immigrated to the United States totaled approximately 14,000, producing some 37,000 children, including 5,000 of mixed race. Around 500 children were successfully adopted into American families. Major occupation centers such as Frankfurt, Heidelberg, Munich, Stuttgart, and Berlin hosted the largest concentrations of Americans, with permanent populations of 20,000 in certain areas. Infrastructure developments, including requisition departments, barracks, and housing units such as Mark Twain Village and Patrick Henry Village, facilitated the sustained presence of U.S. forces. Ultimately, the recollections of German women who lived through the occupation lend depth to these statistics. Their experiences, shaped by resilience, adaptation, and the forging of personal relationships amidst political upheaval, highlight the transformative power of individual choices in history. Through their marriages, work, and daily lives, these women created channels of understanding and reconciliation that politics alone could not achieve. Their legacy demonstrates that even in the aftermath of conflict, human connection has the capacity to overcome entrenched divisions and lay the groundwork for enduring international friendship. The experiences of individuals during the immediate post-war years are captured in letters, journals, and oral testimonies, offering a nuanced understanding of how people coped, adapted, and transformed under extreme circumstances. Interviews conducted in 1990 by Lisa Lotta Williams and N. Kruger provide particularly rich insight into these lived realities. For contemporary readers, it is difficult to grasp the depth and desperation in 1945. One woman recounted her personal losses. Her father had perished in Russia, her brother was listed missing in action, and her family home lay in ruins. At 19, educated and fluent in English, she faced a shattered job market, where the only available employment involved clearing rubble for a meager 72 Reichsmarks per month, insufficient even for basic sustenance. When the U.S. military announced openings for translators, 500 women applied for just 10 positions. Her proficiency in English earned her the role, offering 200 Reichsmarks per month and access to the military canteen. Colleagues derisively nicknamed her Army whore, reflecting resentment toward her association with American forces, even though her work was limited to document translation. During this time, she met Bill, a kind and respectful American soldier whose demeanor contradicted the prevailing Nazi propaganda. Their courtship lasted 6 months in secrecy, as fraternization remained forbidden. When they were finally able to marry in 1947, her mother severed ties with her, perceiving the marriage as a betrayal to Germany, and never met her grandchildren. Relocating to the United States introduced a new set of challenges. Bill's family in Iowa had lost a son in Normandy, and his mother initially questioned whether the bride's family had been involved with the Nazis. Once reassured that her father had died opposing a war he never supported, she welcomed her into the family with tears and an embrace, a moment that solidified her sense of belonging in her new country. Her children grew up navigating 2 languages and cultures. Her daughter pursued a career as a translator for the State Department, while her son became a military officer serving in Germany. In one generation, the family had moved from surviving amid post-war devastation to actively building connections across borders. From an administrative perspective,
U.S. military authorities faced significant difficulties in managing interactions between occupying troops and the German population. Early policies emphasizing strict separation and punitive measures proved unworkable, confronting both human instincts and logistical realities. General Lucius Clay, the military governor of the American Zone, privately recognized that forbidding fraternization entirely was impractical. Young men and women inevitably sought one another out, making it necessary to either regulate these encounters constructively or risk disorder. As a result, controlled venues such as service clubs, America houses, and youth centers were established to provide safe spaces for social engagement. These sites offered structured alternatives to clandestine dance halls and black market gatherings. Military police reports from 1946 documented the challenges of enforcing a total ban on fraternization. Prohibiting contact entirely undermined troop morale, and soldiers with distinguished service records faced disciplinary action for minor social interactions with German civilians, while informal, often illicit encounters persisted beyond military control. Transitioning from outright prohibition to structured regulation proved effective. Rates of venereal disease, which had surged to 250 cases per 1,000 soldiers by late 1945, declined sharply to 50 per 1,000 by 1948, following the introduction of supervised social programs and medical education campaigns. Furthermore, the currency reform of June 1948 not only stabilized the economy, but also transformed social relations between Americans and Germans. The reform shifted the power dynamic almost overnight, reducing the stark hierarchy of occupier and occupied and fostering a sense of greater equality. Margot Henderson Ney Brown noted the immediate and tangible effects of this shift on interpersonal interactions. On Saturday, June 19, 1948, I found myself contemplating becoming the mistress of an occupying officer merely to secure food for my family. By Monday, June 21st, the situation had shifted drastically. I had obtained a legitimate job with a steady paycheck. Almost immediately, the urgent need to trade personal relationships for survival vanished. For the first time in months, Germans could engage in romantic relationships based on affection rather than necessity. American servicemen observed this rapid social change firsthand. In a letter home dated July 19, 1948, Sergeant Paul Anderson noted the shift in local attitudes. The German women have transformed almost overnight. Before, they would accept any suitor willing to offer chocolate or small favors. Now they are discerning. Men without financial security or prospects are largely ignored. They are seeking genuine emotional connections rather than mere sustenance or advantage.
This newfound economic security allowed the revival of conventional dating patterns. Businesses and social venues reopened under regular commercial operations rather than military support. Restaurants now accepted Deutschmarks instead of barter items like cigarettes. Cinema screened both German productions and American films. Dance halls operated independently, offering entertainment on a commercial basis. The transactional nature of relationships that had dominated the post-war years was increasingly replaced by voluntary courtship, reflecting a return to social normalcy. The consequences of this normalization were measurable in family stability. Marriages entered into during the period of economic deprivation before currency reforms had a divorce rate of roughly 30% within 5 years. Couples who married after the financial stabilization exhibited a significantly lower divorce rate, around 15%, indicating that financial security facilitated more deliberate partner selection. However, the children born to German mothers and American fathers, approximately 37,000 in total, encountered a unique set of challenges. Those whose parents married often gained U.S. citizenship and sometimes relocated to America. The majority, whose fathers did not assume responsibility, remained in Germany and faced social exclusion. Klaus Thompson, born in 1947, recalled the social stigma he endured. "My mother told the neighbors my father had died during the war, but my appearance clearly suggested otherwise. Neighborhood children taunted me as an Ami bastard. Teachers largely ignored the harassment, and apprenticeship programs rejected me. It was only when I immigrated in 1968 to locate my father that I escaped the lasting social stigma. Children of mixed race faced additional hardships in post-war Germany. Racial prejudices persisted, and society had little precedent for integrating Black Germans. Mothers of these children were often pressured to place them in institutions or send them abroad for adoption. The 1952 film Toxie, depicting a mixed-race child of occupying forces, brought national attention to their struggles, but simultaneously reinforced certain stereotypes, portraying the child as a social problem rather than as a full member of society. Despite these systemic obstacles, some mixed-race children managed to thrive. Hans-Jürgen Massaquoi, the son of a German mother and Liberian father, became a respected journalist, documenting the experiences of growing up Black in both Nazi-era and post-war Germany, and providing a rare perspective on a marginalized community. The presence of American troops brought more than just cultural novelties like jazz and chewing gum. German women working for or marrying Americans became channels for broader societal change. The informal demeanor of American soldiers challenged entrenched German hierarchies. Secretaries addressed American officers by their first names, a practice unthinkable in German offices. Soldiers interacted with German children as equals, not subordinates, subtly modeling democratic social relations.
Bridget Coleman and Nay Fisher recalled the personal impact. My American supervisor actually sought my opinion on office matters. No German superior had ever treated our input as valuable before. It completely changed my perception of authority. Ordinary voices being respected represented a profound shift in social norms. Furthermore, exposure to American consumer culture transformed expectations and aspirations. PX stores displayed goods in quantities and quality far beyond what most Germans had imagined possible. American magazines circulating among military families and German employees depicted suburban homes filled with modern conveniences, cars, and opportunities for leisure, offering a striking contrast to post-war German realities and fueling both curiosity and ambition for a different lifestyle. Photographs from the period played a significant role in shaping Germany's post-war reconstruction efforts. The so-called economic miracle of the 1950s extended beyond industrial revival. It represented a broader reimagining of societal potential. German women, exposed to glimpses of American affluence and convenience, began to expect similar standards in their daily lives. This rising consumer appetite helped drive the rapid economic recovery of the Federal Republic. Military chaplains emerged as unexpected mediators in the evolving relationships between Americans and Germans. Although initially skeptical of fraternization between U.S. soldiers and German civilians, many chaplains eventually supported such interactions after observing authentic emotional bonds form despite official restrictions. Chaplain Thomas O'Brien's 1947 report on these dynamics prompted several policy adjustments. He noted having counseled hundreds of couples, remarking, "These unions are not casual or transactional. They are genuine expressions of love. German women risk social stigma, while American soldiers face potential court-martial, yet these couples persisted, suggesting a deeper moral or spiritual approval rather than mere convenience." Churches served as important neutral venues for cross-cultural engagement. From 1946 onward, military chapel services welcomed local Germans, drawing young people intrigued by American Protestant traditions. Likewise, German congregations hosting American services found that U.S. soldiers often contributed generously to reconstruction efforts. Interfaith marriages introduced additional layers of complexity. Catholic-Protestant unions required special permissions, and Jewish servicemen faced heightened scrutiny given the recent history of the Holocaust. Nevertheless, romantic partnerships frequently transcended both religious and national divisions. Ruth Anderson Nagna,
A Lutheran who married a Catholic sergeant recalled, "We had disagreements about theology but shared commitments to family, service, and compassion. These common values supported our marriage for 40 decades." The decade of American military occupation left a lasting imprint on both German and American societies. Roughly 14,000 to 20,000 German women married U.S. servicemen, forging enduring personal and cultural connections between former adversaries. Their 37,000 children became living symbols of these transnational bonds. Beyond these individual experiences, the occupation reshaped German society on a broader scale. Exposure to American democratic ideals, consumer habits, and informal social norms influenced the Federal Republic's development, making the economic miracle as much a social transformation as an industrial resurgence.
American society also underwent subtle but meaningful changes. War brides introduced German cultural practices, such as rigorous education standards and organized domestic routines, enriching their new communities. Many of their children pursued international careers, playing roles in U.S. foreign relations and contributing to global engagement during the Cold War and subsequent decades. Christina Patterson, recalling a reunion in 2000, reflected, "Our marriages went beyond personal choice. They became acts of diplomacy. We demonstrated that former enemies could forge alliances, that hostility could be replaced with cooperation, and that the devastation of war could give way to constructive partnership." Historians now recognize German-American relationships from 1945 to 1955 as pivotal to the success of the occupation and the subsequent long-term alliance. Unlike stricter occupations, which often generated resentment, American policy on fraternization facilitated reconciliation. Dr. Maria Hearn, a leading expert on occupation-era social dynamics, asserts, "Marriages between German women and American soldiers achieved what formal treaties could not: genuine human reconciliation. Relationships that began out of loneliness or practical necessity matured into authentic partnerships, illustrating the potential of democratic cooperation." Comparisons with the Soviet occupation underscore this contrast. While Soviet troops also pursued relationships with German women, official prohibitions and restrictions on marriage prevented enduring bonds. In contrast, the American zone's gradual shift from restrictive policies to acceptance created sustainable connections. Critics acknowledge the problematic elements of these relationships: power imbalances, economic pressures, and children left behind. But most scholars agree that allowing legitimate partnerships was both more humane and politically effective than rigid enforcement of prohibitions. In 1995, marking 50 years since the end of the occupation, a significant reunion brought together surviving war brides in Washington, D.C. Over 500 women, many now grandmothers, convened to recount experiences that had remained largely unspoken for decades. The keynote address was delivered by Ingrid Morrison, née Becca, the author whose journal forms the foundation of this narrative. She reflected on the shared journey of these women. "We were young and caught in the tumult of history, living in the shadow of defeat, yet refusing to surrender our dignity. Though faced with scarcity and uncertainty, we chose love instead of resentment, hope rather than despair, and the promise of tomorrow over the traumas of yesterday. Labels such as opportunists or traitors were hurled at us, but they never captured who we were. We were survivors, and in surviving, we became architects of new lives. Through our marriages, we built connections that transcended former enmities. Our children grew up as citizens of two worlds, embodying a bridge between cultures. We demonstrated that yesterday's enemies could coexist peacefully with today's neighbors. To our daughters and granddaughters, we passed on a dual heritage, not as a weight, but as a gift,
a blending of German and American traditions that teaches the value of love beyond borders and patriotism without animosity. She cautioned historians against romanticizing their stories, emphasizing the harsh realities they endured. Discrimination, abandonment, and social isolation were common. Many of their peers succumbed to despair, turning to prostitution, suicide, or mental illness. The survivors carried the weight of those losses alongside their own accomplishments. Before passing judgment, consider our circumstances, Morrison continued. Imagine living through hunger, bombardment, and military occupation. Consider the agonizing choice between cooperation and starvation. Then, ask whether exchanging companionship for a few morsels of chocolate was a moral failing or a strategy for survival. We emerged from the devastation of war as transformed individuals, rebel women who became American citizens, former foes who became partners, vulnerable girls who evolved into determined, capable women. Our legacy extends beyond marriage. It is a testament to the human capacity to reconstruct peace from the ashes of destruction. The audience responded with a prolonged standing ovation. Husbands, bicultural children, and the German women themselves collectively honored the extraordinary yet often overlooked contributions of these women, whose lives bridged seemingly insurmountable divides. The narrative of German women and American servicemen in the aftermath of World War II transcends national histories. It underscores the resilience of human connection, the power of love in the wake of animosity, and the ability to rebuild even amidst ruin. Whether through matrimony or professional collaboration, these women played a vital role in one of history's most effective occupation efforts. Their relationships, spanning survival-driven interactions to genuine romantic bonds, humanized former adversaries and facilitated reconciliation. The progression from survival-focused relationships in 1945 to cooperative partnerships by 1955 mirrors Germany's transformation from a vanquished enemy to a democratic ally. Personal relationships became microcosms of international diplomacy, demonstrating how individual bonds can pave the way for broader reconciliation and mutual understanding. In the aftermath of World War II, the interactions between German women and American soldiers laid the groundwork for a profound social and cultural transformation. Many of the children born from these unions would go on to serve in armies, work in diplomacy, or contribute to international organizations across the globe. These individuals, carrying dual heritage, became natural mediators between cultures, embodying the potential for understanding that arises from the blending of histories once thought irreconcilable. They illustrate a remarkable historical truth. Even amidst the devastation of war, unexpected forms of creation and reconstruction can emerge. For the German women encountering American servicemen in the spring of 1945, survival was the immediate concern. They sought nourishment, safety, and protection for their families, often facing harrowing circumstances that overshadowed any thought of the larger consequences of their choices. Yet these personal decisions, accepting an offered piece of chocolate, ignoring certain prohibitions, performing small acts of kindness, accumulated into forces that shaped history. The small gestures of mercy and human connection during the occupation ultimately contributed to vast social changes. By 1955, the women who had once navigated the ruins of their cities were recognized not merely as survivors, but as the architects of new social bridges. Their journey, from deprivation to dignity, from subjects to citizens, from adversaries to family, represents one of the most remarkable transformations of the 20th century. Through their experiences, they demonstrated that even in moments of profound despair, human relationships have the power to endure, adapt, and overcome divisions. The legacy of these interactions is not captured in numbers alone. It lives in transnational families,
in children fluent in multiple languages, and in descendants who seamlessly embody both German and American identities. These stories underscore that love and human connection, even when arising under complex and difficult circumstances, can transcend long-standing animosities. Personal artifacts, like the fountain pen used by one German woman to record her impressions of American soldiers in 1945, later chronicled a new life across the Atlantic, symbolizing the full arc of transformation from occupied to integrated, from enemy to ally. When multiplied across countless individual experiences, these personal transformations altered the broader course of history. From the ashes of widespread destruction, not only were buildings rebuilt, but meaningful human reconciliation took root. The German women and American soldiers who found each other amid the chaos of occupation demonstrated that social reconstruction could begin with simple human acts: a shared meal, a dance, a blessing, or a quiet moment of understanding. The post-war era in Germany was shaped as much by these intimate encounters as by formal policies or political negotiations. Through courage, compromise, and human connection, ordinary women contributed to extraordinary societal change. Today, every family reunion spanning the Atlantic, every bilingual grandchild, and every act of friendship between former adversaries stands as a testament to their enduring influence. Their resilience transformed some of history's darkest chapters into pathways toward reconciliation and peace. Ultimately, the story of German women and American soldiers after World War II defies simplistic labels of tragedy or romance. It is instead a complex tapestry of human endurance and adaptability. From defeat and devastation arose connections that redefined lives, reshaped societies, and fostered a lasting bond between two nations once torn by war. While the formal occupation concluded in 1955, the human consequences of those years persist in millions of descendants, in enduring alliances, and in the proof that even the most destructive conflicts can give rise to unexpected, lasting structures of peace. Across generations and continents, the offspring of these encounters embody reconciliation, demonstrating that bonds of humanity can surpass divisions of nationality, language, and history.